Todd, otherwise known as Toddy, and I'm here tonight in an independent capacity just to help facilitate the meeting. Last time I was here I had a little bit of Rural Support Trust aspect to what I was doing, and tonight I sort of sit outside of that and I'm purely here just to help run the meeting. We never know, as we've discovered this year, when the shit's going to hit the fan, so in terms of emergency procedures, if it happens before we officially, let's start the meeting now, and if we need to evacuate, go out through the door there and we assemble in the car park, and that there are loos out there as well if you need them. I believe this is a no smoking venue as well. So welcome along everybody. Here's to a productive discussion. It's a process, not an event, getting through this, so there are phases, and some of us in the room are at different stages to others, so there'll be different aspects for all of us here. But Jeff Downer, to my left, to your right, has just asked to open the meeting on behalf of the residents, so I'll hand it to Jeff to kick us off.
Thank you.
Okay, just before I actually start, just in case this gets heated, we don't want it to get heated. For us to gain respect from the council people here, we have to respect them as well. So if we can just remember that, thanks. You know, we've had a few outbursts in the past and we'd just like to keep it civil tonight if we can, please. So anyway, we had a meeting last night of the Pakowhai community, and we decided that we needed to address the meeting before it started, and so I'm just going to read out a summary of what we talked about last night, and at some point during the evening these gentlemen may like to respond to any of the comments that we've got to say. So the Regional Council and the Hastings District Council are basing most of their decisions on the risk to life. While risk to life is a very important aspect of the decision-making process, it isn't the only consideration. We believe that the risk of this event happening again has just as much importance as risk to life. For 80 years approximately, people have enjoyed living their lives in Pakowhai and have been considered safe. Right up until the 13th of February, we were safe. And there has never been any discussion about them or us being unsafe. If you look at what's happened since and what is we're told that is going to happen, the stock banks are now returned to the 1 in 100 year level, which has always been considered as a safe level to live here. With the probability that the debris that has come down the river and dammed up the bridges no longer a problem, and the fact that the council has said that they are going to rebuild the bridges in a manner that debris damming up the bridges should no longer be a concern. In some cases, there is a probability that parts of the rivers have gotten deeper and possibly wider, which would enable a greater volume of water to be contained. The stock banks have been repaired to today's standards, not the standards of 30 years ago. The depth of shingle removal and shingle and river mouths are also being looked at. Taking all of these factors, and including that there was no loss of life in Pakowhai area, we believe that we are actually safer now than we were prior to the cyclone. Add to that the fact that had the evacuation notices, whatever, messages been sent out that we could actually get, we would have had 3 to 4 hours notice of impending water coming towards us that we weren't given. Add to that the inadequate evacuation system, if that's improved, so that it wasn't reliant on cell towers or power, e.g. maybe a helicopter with a loud hailer. If that is all implemented, we are even safer. The only risk to life, we believe, was that we weren't informed of potential danger until it was too late, and we were left to our own devices. The fact there were no deaths in this area is testament to the safety of the area and the common sense of the residents. It is common sense that needs to be applied to the category decisions here that need to be addressed. I don't believe that any resident who has experienced this disaster would remain once informed that evacuation was necessary. And if time was allowed, as we could have had in this case, we could have actually saved some of our possessions and pets rather than losing everything. We urge you to reconsider your decisions. We do have... Oops, sorry. So, as I've said, really, we think there's more than risk to life. It's important. Someone in Franklin Road did lose their life. And, you know, a lot of other people could have. But in the end, it's you people who did what you needed to do when the chips were down. And that will happen every time there's a disaster, if there is ever another one. And I think that what work that has already been done and what they're promising to do is going to make us safer than we've ever been. We've been safe for 80 years. Why aren't we safe today?
Yeah.
Good on you, Jeff. And let me too, as the independent person, if you like, in the room, just acknowledge the signage around. Like, you know, it's great to live in a free country. And I picked this one up because I think from where I sit, the fact that we're here tonight with the ability to discuss what's going on and in the knowledge that there's a consultation process coming along suggests that there's not a dictatorial approach being taken. But was that independent enough? So look, the purpose of the meeting tonight is primarily to give everyone further understanding of the contents of the Regional Council's technical work and the PDP report, and to answer any questions that you may have. Further explanation from HBRC as to the categorisations in 2 and 3 that have been announced. The process of how and when properties will move from provisional to confirmed categories. How to give your feedback and when it's needed. And a brief update on the cost sharing agreement with government, including the latest information that we have at this point. So we have got council connectors here. Where are you? Are you all over the show? Yep, they should be known to many of you. So they'll be here obviously for you to talk to after the meeting. And people from Regional Council, elected members and staff. Yeah, and the Insurance Council is also represented here tonight. So those people will be here available for one-on-one. So I think, for those of you that aren't familiar, furthest from me is the Hawke's Bay Regional Council CEO, Dr. Nick Peake, and CEO Hastings DC, Nigel Pickle. And Chris Dooley, are you part of this, or are you sitting?
As required.
You're as required. Okay, there you go. Oh, that's what it says. You're here as required. And Nigel's going to answer questions largely about the Category 3 voluntary compensation for residential properties. Any questions are welcome, but we would ask that you wait until the end of the presentations to do that, because hopefully what these guys have got to present will go some way towards answering your questions on the way through. And I know there's been previous meetings, so ideally the questions will be new ones. Okay, are we on the next slide? Oh, yes we are. So why do we need to undertake the process? This is all going to be explained, the roles and responsibilities, so you know where the dividing line is between HDC and HBRC, the reviews that are underway, and Civil Defence's emergency response. You guys know that's happening? You do now?
I think
Yeah.
categories and buyouts is where we'll start.
Categories and buyouts is where we'll start. Okay. Rightio, well should we tear into it then? So there's a few things on the list there, but I think these guys are well versed in what's going on. So perhaps hand it to Nick first to talk to the map. This will be your microphone.
Thanks, Toddy, and good evening. And my name's Nick Peake, and 4 or 5 weeks into the role as the CE. Before I get started, Just echo some of those early comments from Jeff there about what this community went through and what you continue to go through, but also what you did to look after each other when the emergency came knocking at your door back on the 13th and 14th of February. So, look, a huge job there. And recognise that none of these discussions are easy, and they're not easy talking about the future of where people live and how that works. So as much as I can, just to acknowledge that at the beginning of this discussion. Really aware that people in the room have probably got different sets of knowledge around things like land categories, and I don't want to spend ages on kind of how they work, but I thought it'd just be useful to touch on them briefly, just so that we're all on the same page in advance of questions. Land categories essentially were put in place by government back in June, so somewhere between the 1st and 7th of June. Government's response to the cyclone announced a set of land categories, and those range from, as you'll be aware, 1 to 3. Essentially, 1 is get on with life and life is back to normal. 2 has a range of options in it, depending on state of knowledge around flood protection and risk to life. And we'll talk a little bit about the history of that in a second. And category 3 essentially is defined by government as the risk to life can't be adequately managed and mitigated, or feasibly managed and mitigated. And I think in Jeff's early introduction there was a wider view of communities. The job that government has given us as a regional council is to identify the hazard, and that hazard to be based on risk to life and based on what happened in the cyclone. And that's as far as government's mandate to us stretches. Now, I realise that that's not the only thing a community thinks about when it thinks about its future. I mentioned that in the middle of those categories there's a thing called Category 2, and Category 2 has a number of subparts, if you like, in it. Category 2A, which essentially means that a whole lot more work needed to be done to understand whether the risk to life from flooding could be mitigated or not, or whether properties in 2A there was no potential solution, in which case those properties would end up in 3. If there was a solution, they moved to 2C and then through to 1. So a critical part of the job that was then faced by the Regional Council, and I think was probably talked about at some of those earlier meetings, was to start that process of assessing risk to life. And very early in the piece, Pakowhai was largely, not entirely, categorised as 2A, to give us the best chance of looking to find out was there a solution to the flooding issues, and to understand all the work and the knowledge that you had around what happened on the night. So 2A allowed us the time to do that. In some other parts of the region, places went, like Esk, places went very quickly to 3. So a bunch of work then got underway, and I thought it would be useful to talk about kind of how that process of land categorisation works, and then move on to the map. Essentially, the land categorisation process is a technical process. So at the end of the day, I need to be able to stand up and look in the mirror and say, am I putting people back into, in terms of identifying that hazard, am I going to put them back into the same hazards that they've just emerged from, or can those hazards be appropriately mitigated? And that's a technical process and a technical decision that needs to get taken around risk and hazards. The key thing, I guess, is how that decision is informed. So whilst I don't have the ability to kind of consult on that final decision, I do have the ability to try and pull together as much of the information we have around the event and you have around the event as we possibly can. In doing that, I'm balancing two things up in terms of the speed at which that process happens. One, people who have got absolutely legitimate concerns about wanting more information and more data and looking to see how they are affected, and equally a group of people who just want the certainty to move on to the next stage. And in every community I've spoken to in the last wee while, there's a mixture of those views. So in terms of understanding the information that goes into that categorisation process, it is a mixture of things, and it's been a mixture of engineers being out in Pakowhai, and I'll touch on whether they would talk to everybody individually or not in a second, but there's some on-the-ground work from engineers. There is the assessment of where the flooding went and where the water went. There's all the information that you have provided by social media, by emails to us, or to Hastings, that's all being passed on to us. There are all the property inspection reports that were done post-flood. There are all the measurements around the height of the water and people's experiences that were traumatic in many cases around water around their roofs. All of those things get pulled together into a report that essentially gives me the ability to then say what is that risk to life, and where in those categories that government has set out to pieces of land sit. So absolutely important that the information that you have provided and continue to provide is part of that decision-making process. I just touch on kind of the timeline piece then, because I've had lots of questions around this and kind of how the PDP works into that. So at the outset, we've looked to put in place some independence and some tests in the process. So in doing that land categorisation work, one option was essentially that the regional council just went away and did it in an office, came out with a result, and that was that. That was clearly not going to be the best way of working. So we've tried to put a number of tests into that system. The first one of those was a process that we're following as an appropriate process for this kind of work, because frankly nobody's done it in New Zealand before to this extent. So we were with you flying that plane together for the first time. So we got hold of the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, and they commissioned an organisation called Tonkin & Taylor to peer review the process that we were following around risk management. We also looked to bring in some external expertise so that it wasn't purely regional council staff looking at the risk to life issues, grabbing hold of that information that many people in this room were sending, and the river engineers work. And that's the role that PDP have played in this process. Finally, at the end of the process, I have to go back to government and say, here's the process we followed as an organisation to identify risk. So we've tried to build as many safeguards into that process as possible, and just wanted to make sure we'd explain that tonight. I'm just going to grab a drink of water. So the next stage then, as how that's affected Pakowhai, in those early meetings, there was an initial early draft of work done by PDP with the early information coming out of the community about where the flooding had occurred. And that got released, and at that point the majority of Pakowhai was sitting in 2A, with some of the area sitting in 3, but a relatively limited amount. Work's continued to go on, so people have continued to come out and look at the situation, understand what had happened, and so on. Several weeks into that process, it became apparent that the recommendations that were going to come in the report finally to me were going to recommend a different scenario with a significant part of Pakowhai heading into 3 and parts of Pakowhai going into 2C. Now, at that point I had a decision to make because the report is running in parallel with the information coming in. I thought it was important that as a community you got that information and we got that information out to you as early as we possibly could. So people who were waiting to understand what this process was beginning to generate had that. And that's what generated the letter and the email to you probably 10 days or so ago now. So I could have waited for the report to be further completed, or say, hey look, this is where the thinking's going. We really need to make sure we get your information back if you've got anything else you want to share with us before that report gets completed. So that's the process that's run up to this point, and for some people I know that's a challenging place to be. The basis of all that work, and once we've received any more information that people want to share, is the point at which that final decision on risk, or that decision on risk gets made. The challenge around that is making that decision to then enable my colleagues at Hastings District Council, for those people who are going to be interested in property buyouts, to begin that process. So there's some timing to get that done at a decent pace. So that's been the process. What I might move to now, Toddy, is just to have a look at the maps and some of the reasoning around where that's got to. And these do remain provisional at this stage, and I know there's a number of connectors in the room, and if you've got information that you still think we're missing, then the ability to talk to those connectors to put it into the process. So if we could whiz on to the slide. And hey, look, again, acknowledge how kind of confronting it is to see places that you hold in your heart and love to be sitting on a map with coloured zones on it. And in a lot of ways that dehumanises the places that you hold so dear. So look, really acknowledge that. Essentially, the challenges for Pakowhai are a couple of really significant ones. One is the location of the community between major river systems. At any stage, if we have an overtopping or a failure of stop banks on the inside of those river systems, all of that water eventually ends up in Pakowhai. And in some ways it's an accident of history in the way that those rivers have been moved and communities have grown over the years. No stop bank will ever provide you absolute protection. You simply can't build them big enough or high enough. So at some stage in the future, stop banks right around the country are vulnerable to overtopping, and that's what happened in this event. So you end up with a whole lot of water ending up inside your community. The other real challenge for Pakowhai is the depth to which that water rises. And I've read and watched some of the stories of your heroic efforts to escape from the flood. So there's a twin set of challenges there, and the question then becomes, how could you deal with those? In our view, and we're happy to discuss that further, the feasible and practicable options for trying to mitigate that situation are really limited, and so that's why the initial thinking has now come to put more of Pakowhai into Category 3. There's a portion of Pakowhai in Category 2C, And there's an old stop bank system in there that, with some further work, can probably provide adequate protection to those parts of the community. And look, that's a tough place to get to, and a tough message to stand up and talk about. We still want some time for you to be able to input your information into that process. But I'll be absolutely honest, at some point in the near future, we have to bring that process to a conclusion in order for people who want to be involved in the buyout process and so on to begin to move into that. So I know that's not an easy message, but I think it was an important one to talk about. Happy if you want some more discussion around kind of why the line exactly sits where it is. And look, I absolutely recognise that lines on maps are really tough things, and perhaps the hardest part of lines on maps is being on close to either side of them. It's a really difficult place to be. In terms of the process from here, PDP have been building a report for us in parallel with us coming out to ask you for more information. I think that's at the point now where we've incorporated what we've heard so far, and we'll be able to put that into the public arena for you, likely Monday next week. My advice would be, if you want to look at that, absolutely do it. The best feedback is the feedback about your experiences of the flood, because that's critical to that risk to life discussion. I've got views about engineering, but I'm not an engineer, and so when the engineers hear my views on engineering, they tend to kind of say, well, good ideas, Nick, but not terribly practical or doable. So, you know, if you have got things you want us to put into that, absolutely do so. But yeah, there will be a time when we have to call a halt to that process. So that's kind of where we've got to at this point, and I think maybe that's a useful point to take a stop and a break and hand over to Nigel for a couple of comments. Do you want to do questions or finish off? I'm easy either way.
Well, it's your meeting, Pakowhai. Do you want to have questions to Nick now, or do you want to hold them to the end?
I'd just like to say that next year all the costs written around our house.
Okay. Okay, just got one here first. What dates of categorisation going to be finalised?
We'd like to get all the feedback in the next week or 10 days, so that the report can then be completed and we go to that finalisation process. So I don't have an exact date, but certainly in the next 3 or 4 weeks we're looking to get that completed, because the buyout process then has to get underway.
There's a question here.
I'd just like to say at 8:30 in the morning, we were outside and our concrete was all dry, our land was dry, and then we see it trickle in the gateway. So we did not get flooded, we got deluged from up in the hills because you guys did not clean out the rivers and you did not give us water, you did not open the river mouth. That's why we're here today. And you've sacrificed us for Hastings and Napier. And what happens if it goes into Hastings or Napier next time? Are they going to be categorised 3? The other thing is I'd like to say that right in the beginning,
Yeah.
We've got another microphone.
I just like to say, you could hear me, right in the beginning, you have categorised one of our blocks as 3.
So the lady here's saying that at 8:30 in the morning the water was trickling in, then they got...
It was dry.
It was dry, sorry.
After that,
Then you got deluged.
and by 9 o'clock we're on the neighbour's shed roof.
Yeah, by 9 AM on the neighbour's shed roof.
That's only us, that's not other ones in
Yeah,
the area.
it's your situation. So if
Have
the...
you considered the investigating council's mitigating factors where there's negligence on the part of council for the maintenance of the riverways? You seem to be comparing apples with oranges at this stage,
So-
because you now have a very different situation. Slush and Slash has been washed down, the silt's been washed down, the river's a completely different river now.
Okay, so we've only got one microphone, so if we've got a question, I think, because your question actually was the end of this lady's question as well, about what's the council done about cleaning out the rivers and what would happen if the water got into Hastings or Napier. So perhaps
No, the
Nick, you just...
question was, has there been an investigation into the mitigating factors that council is responsible for not maintaining its riverways?
Okay, thank you.
So if I deal with this question first and then the second one. Ultimately, if new areas are flooded in a similar catastrophe, it'll be the choice of the government of the day as to how they deal with land categorisation. If they follow the same process, we would be in the same situation. So at the moment we're tied by essentially needing to assess risk related to this event. In terms of future, or in terms of river management, managing rivers is a hell of a complex job. We have now put in place, or the council has put in place, an independent review being run externally from council of the flood management process. So that's underway, and it's not one that I'm going to get involved in because they don't want to talk to me. That panel will end up talking to communities about flood management generally across rivers in Hawke's Bay.
So there's no internal investigation as to council's negligence with maintaining its waterways that's contributed to the flooding?
The appropriate investigation is one around, it is being done externally to council. So there's an external panel being appointed and they're just getting underway.
That factor has huge impact on making decisions as to whether the area is safe for people to live in.
Yeah.
That is an important factor you were leaving out of your report.
You stated before you based the categories on the danger of loss to life and on the depth of the water at certain places. This area here is lower than that area. So why are they not in category 3? You said stop banks could break at any time.
Yep.
So it could break their side, not our side.
And we have to deal with the effects of the flooding of this cyclone. So areas that weren't flooded in the cyclone to the extent that Pakowhai was, we don't have a mandate to deal with at this point. So
It's not the future danger. You're closing category 3 because of future danger.
The proposal to put
exactly what he said.
Pakowhai, or just so I clear that up, it's a mixture of what has happened in the recent event, so the depth and velocity of water that you suffered through the cyclone. That's the main issue that we're dealing with here. We have to consider the fact that in the long term, Pakowhai is particularly vulnerable to flooding events.
You're dealing with apples and oranges. You've now got a different river. There were mitigating factors of council not maintaining waterways.
And there's an independent review being conducted into the council's maintenance of waterways.
However, that independent review needs to contribute to this overarching review of whether it's safe for people to continue living in Pakowhai.
Fair point. Question here?
My question is, there's risk to life in the whole of the world, and surely risk to life can be mitigated with a civil defence system that allows us warning and gives us an idea of what exactly we're up against. I know in future if water started to come, I've got a plan to get out. You know, like none of that is being considered. If we had have known there was a way to get out, we all would have gone. Nobody died in Pakowhai either.
I would better use this. And then I'll go down to this one down there and then I'll come to you, Jeff.
Look, the makeup of civil defence in the future, I think if you looked at civil defence and said everywhere where there's a risk to people, civil defence will be there, the moment something happens, it is unlikely to be the case. the assessment we have to make here is about the risk from flooding and the risk from what happens to the rivers should that water enter Pakowhai. So that's the primary issue that we need to look at. Depth, velocity of water, what happened during the event, and the vulnerability of this part of the world.
I'll get just while I'm walking down there, what I'm hearing is there's a lot of things in this discussion and they've all been aired, which is great, and we're not all going to agree with the findings, but at least we're all being heard.
In the early time, we were told that civil defence was going to undergo an investigation, whether it be internal or external. Their role in this is one of the most powerful factors into the situation that Pakowhai found itself back in, a total absence. Surely if they can come up with strategies and systems, that would totally mitigate the risk to loss of life.
No one died.
If that's what it's all about.
So where is there,
And we didn't get a warning.
So really the question's around civil defence. If their system was good enough,
We could live there.
we could live there.
Absolutely. You know, we could all just have a vote.
To cover the...
Just have a vote.
To,
Live there if we had a good civil defence. Come on, guys.
To cover your first question, sorry, are you happy if I keep going? Yeah, to cover your first question off in terms of a review of civil defence, yes, I am aware that one's underway and it's just in the process of being commissioned and will be done independently of the civil defence group in Hawke's Bay. So that process is underway. Look, I know it's a difficult thing for me to be able to say, but ultimately the risk to life around land categorisation is based on the effects of flooding and the effects of flooding in this cyclone in particular.
And it sounds
So-
like the government has trapped you into that. You know, there's no room for that.
And look, so that's the place we're at. I absolutely accept that people will have different views around the land categorisation process and whether that's an appropriate way to react after a major event. And look, I respect those views. At the moment, it's what we've got to work with, and I could walk away and say, no, we're not going to work with it. And for some people, that would be a comfortable thing for us to do. For other people who are looking for a different outcome, they would be really aggrieved by that process. So it is the process, and I can't change that for you, I'm afraid. I'm just being honest.
Okay, Jeff had a question.
At the very first meeting that we had at the school, one of your staff said that they accepted a mistake had been made and the pumps hadn't been turned on at Pakowhai because Pakowhai doesn't flood. My next question is, at the meeting that I attended with you guys a few weeks ago, we were told that the categories finalisation had been done, and you all appeared somewhat surprised when we said, weren't you consulting with the community first? You know, where does that come from?
In terms of pumps, look, I'm afraid I wasn't at that meeting, but ultimately you can't pump that volume of water out fast enough to deal with it. It's just not a practical thing.
Not flooding that's important, because for 80 years it hasn't flooded.
Well, yeah, look,
You designed it for 100 year
and it was
we had that event.
yeah, and it overtopped it and flooded. We haven't, just to be clear, we haven't finalised any of these categories, and actually as soon as we were aware enough of the potential change from 2A to more 3 and some to 2C, we thought that was important to get that information out to you as a community. So That's why there's no word final written on any of these maps at this
But the
stage.
word final came out of one of your staff's mouth.
How many beats, parts and properties have you actually walked?
Nobody.
How many properties did the consultants visit?
I'll deal with that issue directly. There would be the important thing is that we have got information on properties, and there's an opportunity for you as property owners to provide further information. There is not enough people. There are not enough engineers for us across Hawke's Bay, and there are lots of communities affected across Hawke's Bay, for us to come and visit everybody individually and still make a timely decision. I don't know the number off the top of my head.
So I think we've got a question from a lady there, a gentleman with a hairdo like mine, and a chap down the back there. So we have those three questions, then I'll hand to you, Nigel, and then after Nigel will be opportunity for further questions there. So I'll go down here first. If that's all right, because otherwise it'll get later.
Well, half my property, a third of my property is in 2C, and the other 2 feet is in the red zone. And I want to build again, because I'm not moving out of my property. So when can I start building?
Is that a question for you, Nigel? Well, no.
That's probably better. Look, recognise that lines on maps in some places are crossing through bits of properties. I think let's have a indeed, but let's have a conversation via the connectors. Ultimately, that 2C land would be able to be built on. So there's a way of getting building consents and so on underway for that land. And if that's the safest part of your property, that may be the option that's best available to you.
Okay, so chap here and then down the back with the sweatshirt. That's good, because people need to hear.
Hey, just looking at your nice shaded diagram up there, and hey, you can't help but look at it and think, yeah, that a nice orange bit is very vulnerable. Hey, if we look at what's happened in the past, yep, it flooded. So we're looking, you know, we can only control what's happening in the future. So in the future, if it was left to nature, it'd be a lottery which way that water's going to go. Is there something here that you're not telling us? When you look at your nice spillway there, is there a plan in the future that you want to share with us? That, you know, we all know that people were sent to relieve the banks. Is that a plan that you guys are looking at for the future time? So, because obviously everyone's probably going to react a bit quicker next time. So, is that part of your planning here? That we, you know, that if that is part of the planning, well, that might make it a little bit easier for people to accept what's happening.
No, there's no plan that I'm aware of anywhere around trying to create a spillway through Pakowhai. The proposed works to defend the areas that are blue in there in 2C involve reinstating some of the old stop bank system that was previously there but has degraded over many years and hasn't been a stop bank system. So that's the next bit of protection that can be done.
Again, another factor that you should be investigating council's lack of management. To have this report based on apples and oranges is ridiculous.
So just the last question at this stage, and then we'll hear from Nigel, and then more questions after that.
Just, you're saying that it's dangerous there with the height, so pretty much you're saying it is a flood zone. Is that correct? Because if it's a flood zone, I want to be compensated fully for my land, the whole lot, not just the residential, the whole lot. And if you have to sell assets to fund it, well, you're going to have to do that, because I'm not moving anywhere.
It's going to be cheap buyout.
In terms of land buyout at the moment, the proposals with government and Nigel will talk a bit more about with Hastings District are based on residential properties, not on land. Oh, sorry.
So that we wanted you to acknowledge or disavow the fact that it was a floodplain.
In terms of whether people decide to move, it is ultimately voluntary, and there's not a compulsion in the process. So that's.
I'm not going anywhere.
Look, and I'm not going to try and change your mind on that. That's ultimately your call.
So if people in category 3 do not accept the buyout offer and elect to stay on their land, does the council plan to extinguish their property rights to stay there?
No, because there's no basis in law to extinguish anyone's property rights. It's why the offer will be voluntary to category 3. That's been well established through the courts. It's why you could visit Christchurch and you can go to areas that were red zone, and there are still people living today in red zones because they chose to stay. So that has been established in the courts. Can I just finish for a moment? So just to reinforce, because it's one of the questions that Troy said came in late, if people in category 3 do not accept the buyout offer and elect to stay on the land, does the council plan to extinguish their property rights to stay there? No, we can't. It's established in law. And where we end up in this categorisation process, it will be a voluntary offer. It's up for you as the landowners to whether you accept that, and we cannot extinguish your right to live where you live. There'll be other implications. But we'll talk about those as well.
Just to clarify, people in category 3, if we decide to start rebuilding tomorrow, there's nothing you can do to get us off our land. Can you please confirm that?
Yeah, so this is where it will get complicated. On category, in the category 3 space, fundamentally what the courts have established, no one can extinguish your property rights. Yeah? In terms of consenting around building new or significantly altered property, that would be so those are the things that look, there are gnarly things everywhere, but what I will just stress is that we cannot extinguish anyone's property rights. That's being established in the courts. That is the laws of New Zealand as things stand today. So I'm going to talk about the where we're at with the voluntary property buyout. So Nick's talked about at some point this process has to come to an end, and people will be confirmed in Pakowhai in either category 2C or category 3. In relation to the voluntary buyout, as we've talked about in previous meetings, we've been in negotiations with the government. The government made clear that one of the options that would be on the table is a voluntary buyout. And they were also very, very clear that unlike Christchurch, they weren't paying, it wasn't the government that was going to be making the offer, and they weren't paying 100% of the bill. That this would be a cost-sharing arrangement with local communities, and they would meet 50% of the costs of the buyout, and the community would need to meet the other 50%. That's the basis on which we went into the negotiations and said, well, can pretty much guarantee you that that will be a big fat no from the council on behalf of all the ratepayers of Hastings. And so where we've ended up is in a space with the government, where the government's basically not changed its position, which is fixed on the voluntary buyout costs. It's 50-50 between the government and the council on behalf of the community of ratepayers, but we've managed to negotiate a whole bunch of other commitments from the government. So $260 million worth of government funding to rebuild roads and bridges, and $203 million of government money to go into flood protection some of which will go into Pakowhai in terms of what Nick's talked about around the Waimate and Tūtaupiri recommissioning of those stock banks. What it means for the Hastings ratepayer is that the deal that's on the table in the round across transport, flood protection and the cost of voluntary buyouts will be rating neutral. It won't, it won't have any impact on rates, the deal that's on the table. But because we have to operate within the law as it stands today, council is not in the business of buying out properties on a voluntary basis, and we are required to consult with the community. So there is a council meeting on Thursday where council will be asked to adopt an amendment to our long-term plan to include an activity called voluntary buyouts into the business of council, and we will, subject to the council agreeing to do that on Thursday, we will start consultation with the community on Friday. The consultation will be open until the 5th of September, where we're asking for people's views on this, obviously understanding all of this in the round. So, I was on the team with Christopher Finlayson that negotiated this with government. It is a $555 million funding deal from the government for Wairoa down to central Hawke's Bay across those component parts. $260 million for transport, $203 million for flood protection, and a contribution on a 50-50 basis for voluntary buyout. It is to be really clear from the Crown,
How much was that, the voluntary buyout?
the initial sum of money for Hastings that we've assessed is $100 million, $50 million from Hastings and $50 million from the government for the properties in Hastings.
That's enough money to work that out.
So
That's the whole area. Hastings District Council was right through to Dartmoor and all that.
Yep.
Isn't it? Is that
Yep.
correct?
So
A lot of houses.
I'll come on to that in a moment. So that's the assessment. Well, look, if you take the show of hands, some of the assumptions we had to make is 100% of people going to take this up? I mean, I heard plenty tonight. People are saying, "Well, we ain't leaving." So we had to make some assumptions around what percentage of people in Category 3 are going to want to, actually avail themselves
What
of
was
a
your
voluntary buyout. So I'm going to get to the assumptions. So we have, here are the facts today. And this is, we have done this at pace with imperfect information, because one of the messages, and Jeff, I'm thinking about, the meeting a couple of weeks ago, people are looking for us to move at pace to give people certainty. So there are circa 300 properties that are indicatively in Category 3 across Hastings. The big numbers are in Esk Valley, in Tangoil and in Pakowhai, and there are a handful in Puketapu, Dartmoor and Risington. That are the Category 3 areas today.
And why that?
There's none in Waihook's Category 2. So those are the Category 3 areas. Of those 300 properties, on those 300 properties today, there are only 150 houses. So there's a bunch of these properties that don't have dwellings on them today.
So what the land's worth nothing then?
We're going to get on to that. Yeah. So we have basically, costed the cost of the residential property, net of insurance, the working set of assumptions is that we will make a voluntary offer to people based on the pre-cyclone market value of the property, net of any insurance, where it will get, and this is an important point to make, because all of you that are in Category 3 and people in 2A that could still go to 3 will get a letter after the council meeting on Thursday, because we will be seeking your views on the parameters of the policy for the voluntary buyout. So the council at this stage, key messages from me. Friday consultation will start. 5th of September it closes. The council is scheduled to meet on the 14th of September to make a decision on all of this following community consultation, and on that date they will also make a decision around the policy parameters for the voluntary buyout. And that policy needs to be informed by the views of the people that are affected. What we've costed it on is on the residential component of properties at pre-cyclone market value net of any insurance that people have received.
So essentially, that's $100 million divided by 150 houses.
It all gets to, so we have made, so again to be clear, we've made this on an initial set of estimates, informed estimates, on some assumptions around take-up. We have a commitment with the Crown that that's the best estimate, it's the basis on which we're making $100 million available initially for the voluntary buyout.
So what's your assumption on how many people are going to pick it up?
We have modelled things on 90% take-up, on paying out for the houses that exist today, not property rights into the future, but you will have views on that the council will have to take into account in terms of setting a policy position on the market value of those properties pre-cyclone. That are the sets of assumptions.
House, or does it include hat houses and sheds and all that sort of thing as well?
It's on the residential component.
You can't even buy a lifestyle property, 5 minutes from town.
What size are you classing as residential?
All to be determined. We're going to need to form those views by the 14th of September. We don't have all of that worked out today, and this is the problem. This is I probably be too gross of a generalisation around Christchurch, but these aren't whole suburbs of residential sections with houses on it. This is a mix of, across all the areas that we're talking about, lifestyle, mixed use, semi-commercial, some residential, and that's where some of the challenge in all of this gets to, is it's not going to be a stock standard model. So we're doing our best to get the funding and the policy parameters right, and you will get a letter, and I'm encouraging you to send us your feedback, because all of that will inform ultimately the policy that the council needs to adopt that will guide the voluntary rights.
What is your plan with the residential properties, with the houses? What is your plan for them if you want to buy them?
Yep. So again, we've got to work all of that through. But the interest isn't necessarily in the council buying in all cases, buying the land and the houses. It might be an option that we're in effect buying the residential property right. If it's sitting on a whole lot of hectares, there's best available land use. It might be that we're buying the property right, not the actual land and house. Those are the things that we've got to work through.
So you're not going to demolish the houses, or so if someone takes your money and carries on living there, what are you going to do? No, because you'll be looking to, in terms of the offer that will be made, and subsequently, you're going to have to do this through legal instruments, whether it's a covenant. The primary reason that the government started this and the whole thing is it being about, and all of this is contestable, is about the risk to life and nothing else. Yeah.
The last 50 years you collected all the rights of all the people here. Honest, hard-working people. We've been in the clean-up group out there in Pakowhai, and we saw beautiful, beautiful properties. This is a responsibility, and I'm not saying that you're not responsible, but it is a responsibility to look after a piece of land, providing food for the community. That was out in Pakowhai happening, and in Espel too. And as much as I heard, none of the council, nobody was coming out to ask them what they need. You only provide what you have to say, we do this and this. So my question was not answered. What are you doing with all the houses you want to buy, or with the land what you want to buy? What are you doing with that?
And you haven't mentioned commercial.
Yep, at this stage, be very clear, the proposal and the costings are not for compensating or acquiring any commercial property.
So it's safe
It is the
to
residential,
lend
it is the
from 9
residential
till
component.
5, but it's not safe to lend them after 5 o'clock. Like this is coronavirus.
Nigel,
market value,
All roads, the roads around here, expressway and all that, dodgy potholes. Worrying about the water coming through, saying we never ever have it.
do you
Yeah,
think
I,
risk
look,
to life
and
is
I
the
get that the community, you know, look, I can't do anything about the expressway. It's not a road that the councils are accountable
It's
for.
not just the expressway, it's every
Oh,
road.
for sure. And look, we've got some really big challenges coming up in the community. Whilst this deal isn't, doesn't have a rating impact, I can tell you that and I've said this in this meeting before, that the bill currently for dealing with the Hastings roading network across all of our communities, including rural, is currently $800 million in terms of the cost of putting the bridges back and the culverts and the roads. And that's all future things that we're going to have to talk to the community about.
Nigel, has it been established, is there any commitment from the Insurance Council if we're to accept, and let's call it optional because voluntary implies two willing parties, when it's one under duress and one under obligation because they've told us we can't live there, but that's semantics. Is there any indication from the Insurance Council, like I'll cite our example, the house was adequately insured, they've done a scope of works which gets up to about half of that write-off value, and that's how insurance companies work, of course. Is there any commitment or even a steer from them about whether, if we do accept this, let's say, optional buyout, will they pay for just what they were proposing to pay for reinstating, or will they pay the write-off value? Because effectively we are compromised, and it is, to all purposes, largely written off for us to live on as we formerly did there, put it that way.
I'll invite my good friend from the New Zealand Insurance Council to come up and make any comments she might want to on behalf of the insurers. I think part of what we're going to have to work through this offer process is some people might be in a situation where they've settled their insurance or they've got an offer that they're willing to accept, from their insurers. It may well be situations where the council, in terms of the offer, are willing, on the agreement of the property owner, that the insurance element gets assigned to the council, and they sort that out with the insurers. So these are some of the things that we're going to have to work through. And the point is not about taking your insurance money; it's about the option for the homeowner, about making the best call for them around whether they want to get the proceeds of the insurance, which would be net of compensation, or whether they want to have the battle with the insurer, or the insurer might agree, hey, look, you can assign that, and the argument can be between the council and the insurer. Those are some of the things that we have to...
But by definition, the more they pay, the less the other two parties have to pay to get to the sum total.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the offer is going to be net of insurance.
Yeah.
Sarah, do you want to introduce that?
No, oh, you introduce yourself. Let everyone know you're here.
So I'm Sarah Knox, Consumer Affairs Manager at the Insurance. Oh, is that better?
Yeah.
Right, sorry. I'm Sarah Knox. I'm the Consumer Affairs Manager from the Insurance Council. To answer your gentleman's question, your policy entitlements, regardless of whether you're category 1, 2, 3 or anything, will remain exactly the same. So your entitlements will be the same. You have the choice, continue with your claim, going through to cash settlement with your insurer, and that doesn't matter which category you're in, so that will stay the same. If you and the insurance company will be paying the damage, so that's regardless of the categories.
So even in category 3, we won't be deemed that it's written off to life as we knew it, and we get the write-off value. No.
It's two different values. Two completely different things. So you will get paid under your insurance policy for the damage up to the limit, which is normally your sum insured for the damage to your property. And then I think the insurance companies, they will go right through to a cash settlement with you. For whatever reason, if you do not want to do that, you may want to sell or transfer your claim with your property to the new owner if you go down that path. That's obviously voluntary, but that will be with the permission of the insurer, and they would assign the claim. But there's a lot of ifs and buts around transfer of claims and assignment of claims, so it's best to talk to your insurance company if you want to go down that path. But if you're just continuing with your insurance company, there's no difference for you.
Okay. So essentially the council will top up to whatever the agreed value is that what we're hearing?
No.
The question was, will the council be topping up to the agreed value?
I couldn't answer that today.
Too soon. So I've got a question. There's a few questions, but this gentleman here, and then you, sir, and then young lady there.
Thanks, guys, for fielding the questions and doing the presenting and telling us where we're at. Kevin McCormick's my name. My family's in the Pakowhai since 1920, so it's a little bit longer than 80 years. It's over 100 years, and the old people that I was brought up with, they never talked about a flood in Pakowhai, but I just wanted to straighten that little bit of history out. In regards to the buyouts, there's language around voluntary buyouts, and it seems a bit of a misnomer, really. Voluntary and buyout in the same sentence. I believe that once, if we're not bought out, or we choose not to be bought out, then there won't be any insurance, and we will be in a category 3 flood zone, which will be a section 72 on our title. We won't be able to build on that property ever. Is that correct?
In terms of likely, in terms of new.
Likely.
Right. So if we don't accept the buyout, then there's no insurance. So it's not really voluntary, is it?
No.
What about fire and theft insurance? Would they still be applicable? And
Just while we're on houses, I do have a couple of questions, and I'll just run them on quick. And one of my other questions was, if there's multiple dwellings on the property, will they all be bought out?
It's about the residential dwellings. Yeah, it's about, so, yeah, if you've got multiple houses, it's about the dealing with the residential dwellings.
Thank you. So the multiple houses that are there will all be bought out. Just one last question, and that is there a possibility that Pakowhai could be put in a special category? We're talking about category 1, 2 and 3. There's people that want to stay, there's people that want to go. Those that want to stay, can we have a category 2Z where it doesn't have a section 72 on it, and they can stay? And the people that want to be bought out, and you'd end up in a category where there's no future building ever allowed, and the buildings that are there can be maintained, but once they fall over, they fall over. There's a lot of beach areas like that. There's
Where are we going to go? How are we going to afford it?
so just as an option, something to think about. Is that a possibility?
Section 72s are on a lot of properties in erosion zones and all sorts, and that's just a stuff we're doing here.
So just on the last point, one of the things that, just on the last question about special categories, I won't try and introduce new categories into what Nick's doing, but we're really clear, because we had the feedback from numerous communities that are affected, that people saying, well look, if I do avail myself of the offer, I want to stay in the community that I've been part of for generations, and how might that be enabled? So we're committing to doing some work. I don't know what it looks like, but we've got a whole lot of people now starting to turn their minds to. So I'll use an example that's top of mind. In Dartmoor, there are 7 properties in category 3. All those property owners agree they're in category 3, and they're looking across the road at a neighbouring farm, and a willing property owner that says, yeah, I'm happy to do a deal with you that you can move across the road to an area that's safe. What it will probably require is some creativity around the district plan provisions. We have a commitment to exploring for the the communities that have got category 3 to explore all the creative options that we can that give people a pathway in category 3 still to live in the communities. I don't know what that looks like, other than we've committed to do that work.
And that's the most sensible thing I've heard from you
in parallel.
in months. Brilliant. Thank you.
My property is on a Pakowhai road. We got another letter from you, say by mistake is on a level 3. Next day I received a letter from you, say look now by mistake is now we are on level 2. Already I think you made decision that time and you wasting couple of months. It's almost 6 months now. I'm paying the huge mortgage. Still I'm paying all the expense. I've finished all my savings. After two properties a safe side, my property is on level 3. I don't know why this happened. It's the same level of the sea level or either on the road. That's second question. The third one, if I move to on the Marine Parade, for example, buy 1 million property, if it's happening tsunami, what happened? All New Zealand, earthquake, tsunami, flood. Let us limit this in an area. If it's happened 2 or 3 times, and then after if you make this decision, level zoning or that's acceptable. Nobody died in Pakowhai on this event, and immediately already you made decision. Give us a chance. Just get the voting today. How many people who want to stay here, and then after, please make decision. That's our choice first.
Look, every sympathy for your situation, and I think you captured exactly the challenge here of moving with enough pace to give people certainty, and people who are stretched financially and want to know whether they can stay or move on with doing the risk assessment work. So, look, I know there were some letters sent out in error, and it was absolutely an error, and for which...
It was an accidentally stamped with the CEO's signatures and then accidentally sent out. That's
it was an absolutely an honest mistake. People working late at night. The land categorisation. I wouldn't be standing here tonight if a final decision had been made. The critical issue was, as soon as we were aware that there was going to be a significant move in categories for Pakowhai, was to get that information out to you, and then the follow-up to that is essentially this evening.
Oh, the lady here, and then I'll come to you, sir, and then to you, Troy.
First, my question was not answered. What are you doing, say, if we spend $200 million, we know we have a plan. What is happening with this plan? How does it look like? And why can't this money, what we go 50-50 with the ratepayers and with the government, why can't that be helping people to live on their own properties? Because we have anyway a living shortage. The rents are skyrocketing. Nobody can afford that anymore. So that's my question.
There's a lot in that. Essentially, the categorisation process that we are going through, we have to apply that government policy. There is not a choice in doing that. I know that sounds brutal, but that's the case. So we have to make that assessment and really appreciate that people will have different views on whether that assessment is right or wrong. But we would be negligent in terms of risk if we didn't do it.
Excuse me, your mission statement clearly states that everything we do when we engage our community. Is that not the basis of your being, to represent your community rather than act as a servant of central government? Thank you.
Do you think there are other
Just
factors
hang on
other
to
than
that one.
right to life that should be taken into
This
consideration?
guy's been very patient. Yeah, he'll answer it.
Thank you. My name is Bill Hawkins. I'm a retired registered valuer of rural. I don't know whether that means anything, but I've got a fairly good knowledge about land and what improvements are and what land value is and all that sort of thing. I would like to ask what the answer is on the demolition of existing properties in classification 3. Who is responsible for the cleaning up of a house that is no longer required to be there?
Thank you, Bill. And we'll get to the one about consultation with the community versus a servant of government.
I'll deal with the valuer question and I'll pass to Nick on the other. Yeah, look, on the arrangements around the 100 million, we've also got, you know, obviously there are some costs and we're in the market at the moment because it's not going to be council that are making these offers. There will be, there is funding for valuers, conveyancing, legal, and also some of the associated costs for demolition as part of the agreement with the Crown, so financial provisions being made for those costs.
Like closing the dumpsters.
We're in an unfortunate situation where we live in a two-storey house. The bottom storey has been completely under. The second storey is high. So how do we make a shift from that house to somewhere else, or do we just basically destroy it?
And for how many years is the categorizing of those properties happening? Is that for the next 2 years, 3 years, 10 years? What happens afterwards when those categories gone? Are you selling that for building houses there now finally for people to live and to work on the land?
There's no time limit at the moment that I'm aware of on that land categorisation. Over time that will get built into the hazard plans that sit in district plans and regional plans. Just to address the earlier question about the role of councils, look, somebody would be doing this land categorisation work. If you went back to Christchurch, government set up an organisation called SARA that was enabled by government legislation and ran the risk and hazard work for Christchurch. In this case, you've got a different government, and that government has said that's the job of councils, and it's not one we can turn down. So it's just a reality.
But the categorizing needs to be done with the people and not just on the desk. So you come out there with the categories, just, okay, this number, there may be a millimeter deeper, there may be a higher, you know, so like you do this like that, because nobody was out in the community to talk to the people themselves. So that's the question, you know, how to make those categories. Why not with the people who are affected with and who are able to live on that land and work it and help us again to come back to fruition in Hawke's Bay?
And I think I talked through the kind of how that categorisation process works, and the information that people and communities have provided has been important to that process. But there is not the capacity for me to send an engineer to every property in the region that's affected. So ultimately, I'm faced with making a risk decision, and that's a technical decision, and it's one that will have to get made.
Okay.
You're getting fit.
So, sorry? I'm getting fit. Yeah, I know. I was worried I wasn't going to eat my steps in today.
The first one's a statement really, and a reminder of the timelines around when we put out a survey to the Pakowhai community, and 65% responded and 90% said that as soon as the category was known when potential shift that they would like to know. That was prior to the erroneous email that went out, which was pointing to the fact that it had shifted, and that was 3.5 weeks before the 4th of August when it was announced. And to be consulting on the PDP report, which presumably hasn't changed since the 4th of August, which was 11 days ago, which is going to be released apparently on Monday for consultation that finishes on Sunday, on what, 27th? I've got the dates wrong. I guess there's probably no answer to that, but that's just a clarification of the timeline. The next is, and a couple of questions here, sorry. This one may be for Elwyn as well, and any other councillors that are here. Sandra must be busy tonight, I imagine. Is this rating neutral issue for Pakowhai to take one for the team, it's a pretty big one, I might add, at no cost to the rest of Hastings District, according to the theory behind your rating neutral explanation, Nigel. Seems crazy, and maybe there's a solution somewhere in there that it doesn't stop at 100 million, and that the people of Hastings District can take out a loan for the next however many years and a rate. There's different ways of rating, it doesn't have to be onerous to everyone. To find a bit more money, and I assume there's no requirement with the government arrangement that it has to be 50-50. There is. It does have to be 50-50, so they can't put in 50 mil and you come up with 100.
Oh, you won't do that. We don't know that, I'm sure.
And I'll give them right back to you. The other one is, and for Elwyn as well, and any other councillors that are here, is the extinguishing of effectively property rights to build into the future and increase the value of your land and your income and your retirement potential on land that doesn't currently have a dwelling on it. It is an extinguishing of your property rights, the way I read it. Well, there's a right to build on there currently on all the titles in Pakowhai that don't have a dwelling on. You have a legitimate right to put a dwelling on there, and that's been taken away.
So Elwyn can speak to that if he likes.
I think Nigel can answer.
Nigel? Over here afterwards.
Yeah, two things. What I'd say on the last point, if I start with that, Troy, as I said, one of the things that we will be doing after the council meeting on Thursday, assuming that the council says yes, we're ready to go out and consult the community, we will send a letter to everybody that's in Category 3 and 2A. This is the council ahead of the 14th of September, seeking your views on the parameters for the policy to guide the buyouts. I think your views legitimate. The council is going to have to make a decision on the 14th of September about the policy for the buyouts. I've been clear that we've sort of said the primary focus was about dealing with the risk, which is living in dwellings that exist today. I understand the point that you're raising. I'd encourage everyone to have their say to the council around the things that are important to you in terms of the policy that they adopt around the buyouts.
Nigel, why do you want to buy in a life risk zone? I don't get it. Why do you want to buy it and those people who want to live there can't be there? Why can't you support your community with funding and say, okay, we make this house, everybody goes there to build it up, then the next house. We can go through that in groups, in bigger groups and trucks and diggers. We can make it happening for the people that they can live on their land. there because you say it's not life safe. You know, it's dangerous.
Use the silt to lift the houses.
Sorry, before you ask that one, Lloyd, can you just go back to the one about the...
Yep. So, in relation to your first question, so where things started with the government was, as you know, Minister Robertson said one of the things when we do this categorisation, for anyone that ends up in category 3, there will be a voluntary buyout. So the starting point in the conversations with the government said all we want to talk to you about is voluntary buyouts, and it's going to be 50-50, and we're not open to any negotiation on it being anything else. We didn't waste a lot of time trying to argue the merits of, well, it was 100% in Christchurch and it was 90-10 in Bulla. The current government said, look, the voluntary buyout in terms of the Crown's assistance will be on a cost-sharing basis, and it will be 50-50. So we've estimated, $100 million is the cost of the voluntary buyouts. So it was clear that would come with a $50 million price tag for the ratepayers of Hastings. What we sought to negotiate, and we did, was said, right, well, can we make this, can we provide assistance to people in Category 3, but without it having a big impact on the ratepayers in Hastings? So we got, of the $260 million worth of transport projects, $200 million of those projects are in Hastings in terms of roads and bridges. It means under the normal government policy settings, we would have had to have contributed $50 million to those roading projects. So in effect, the things that we've been able to negotiate with the government in terms of transport projects they'll fund basically offsets any cost to the ratepayer around putting $50 million in as our 50% share to the $100 million buyout. So that's just to explain, when we say it's rating neutral, that's how it's kind of been worked.
So I understand that on Facebook last week, but
yeah.
my point is, Pakowhai's taken a big hit for Mr Hastings, and it's costing him nothing.
It's not costing, we've still got to put 50, yeah, it's rating neutral. So I'm maybe not understanding the point. I mean, yes, we've got impacted communities here in Pakowhai, similar numbers of Category 3 in Esk and in Tangoil and Risington and Poketapu. We're trying to find a way to give, an offer to people that end up in Category 3.
So was the 100 million, was that a figure that you came to the table after having done some numbers, and then the 50-50 while that equals 50?
Yep.
So what is the other 100 million?
There is a mechanism in the terms that we've negotiated with the government that says, look, this was the best estimates on this data and this set of assumption that got to 100 million. If it ends up being more than that, there is a mechanism in the agreement with the Crown to revisit that if we need more money. What we can't do, and because I think it would be untenable, Troy, is to sort of say, hey, look, we've gone into this with a genuine giving people an offer to consider around getting out of something that we've classified as representing a risk to life. And then we can't help you because we've run out of money. Like, that'd be an untenable situation. So the $100 million is based on a set of estimates and information where we've kind of got to, we think that's the right number. If it's more, we're going to have to, there is a mechanism to review that with the Crown.
So is it, to my point before, is it, let's say it's 150 million?
Yep.
And that mechanism, well, let's say it's 200 million, and that mechanism gets stopped by the government's year with the agreed mechanism, but that's enough, then the notion of having the people that are being protected by Pakowhai taking one, is there a notion of going to them, going to the community and saying, the district, and saying, well, let's put $100 or let's do it on your land value, or let's take a loan for 30 years.
Yep, all of those would be options, but the starting point would be the mechanism with the Crown is that we've said, look, we're doing this from a genuine giving people a pathway out of high risk locations. We've got an estimate of 100. If it ends up being more than that, we're going to have to revisit it. I hope it's on the basis of cost sharing with the Crown, and that's the basis that we've structured it. But if it meant we had to have a conversation with the community, then we'd have to have a conversation with the community. The reality is we're gonna be, and I'm taking this because it's not now, but next year when we talk to the community about the long-term plan for Hastings and recovery, you know, like the bill, like it's eye-watering. $800 million for building back rural connections and, you know, the things we talk about. Can we end up with a future where we don't have bridges with a whole lot of piers in them that create dams, and we have proper bridges with archways and no piers and all that? They're all whopping big bills that we're going to have to talk to the community.
We don't have a handout, so can I just ask in the best way if we want to get a message across, is that in this consultation that's
Please,
on?
yep, that's, you know, come Friday when that opens, yeah, give us your views.
What happens if the government changes?
Yep.
The question here is what happens if the government changes?
Yeah, well, I've got the aspiring, you know, MP for Tuki in the room, but the reality of where we ended up with the government now, this isn't a full and final settlement for ever and a day. This is the best deal we could get with the current government right now to help people in Category 3, help building back some roads and bridges, having a couple of $100 million for flood protection to be able to get on with things. The thing that councils had to confront was, well, if we say no, well, what happens? The one thing that would be certain is we wouldn't be talking to a government, whatever the outcome of the election is, until sometime in 2024. And then do we leave everyone sitting here for another 4 or 5 months? Not the messages we've heard from Pakowhai or other communities that have the biggest impact. We want certainty. We want to be able to get on with our lives.
Nigel, at the end of the day, is Pakowhai still going to be sacrificed? After you've done all these amazing things? Because we were told that when the county council was disestablished, you guys and regional council said then that Pakowhai was to be sacrificed to save Hastings and Napier. And you guys have never ever told us. 5 years ago you gave us consent to build another house, and nowhere does it say that we are on a floodplain. That house is now just like the rest of the houses. So what do you say to that? Why did you 5 years ago not tell us? Why did you not in 1989, 1990, your organisation not tell the people of Pakowhai?
Because it isn't a floodplain.
They designated it. You should know that it's your history and your organisation.
So I can't answer that tonight. I don't know that in 1989 or what the county did. What I know we have, and it's to Nick's point, is we have for the last 80 years had a flood protection scheme and a drainage scheme for the Hetatona floodplains, and that has been built to a 1% annual exceedance event. Cyclone Gabrielle was a massive over-design event, and in Pakowhai, I guess the point that Nick's making is when you get an over-design event on the Nararoto and Tūtai Kuru, and where it breaches, it all ends up in Pakowhai.
Why you don't want to fix it instead of paying the money?
Look, if we could, we would, but we cannot see a feasible way of doing that mitigates that risk, and that's just an honest view.
What about the water coming through my house to go to the people at the back? You know, and what's realistically, what is the risk of this event happening again?
Jeff, the microphone on that way. Question of Nigel, rating values. The rating value of the Hastings district took place, and owners would have got a ticket who live in the Hastings district about what their new values were prior to the earthquake. I would like to ask, for properties that are in Category 3, there's obviously going to be some alteration to the land values in that area on account of the fact that you can't build a house there anymore. So obviously there's going to be some changes in the rating value, the land value that is, because land value is what properties are assessed on for rating purposes. So there should be a very dramatic change in the value of that yellow area, classification 3.
And I'm hoping very much that we're going to be considering reducing those values to a very large extent for rating purposes in the future.
I've got one question up the front right, and then the lady at the back, and then Troy wants to have another crack. Nigel, do you want to address the valuation question?
No, that's no. Points noted.
Points noted.
First of all, congratulations, Nick. We find ourselves in this situation, and you had the bottle to apply, get and receive what you are now dealing with. So that shows me you may be a conviction politician with some bottle. Here we all are again, sort of toing and froing on the, down and out of rabbit holes. And I was quite shocked when you were candid, Nick, about what I feel is a very blunt instrument of assessing what's in the best public interest for not only us, but the Hiratonga Plains and the government for that matter. I'll be putting up on the Pakowhai site tomorrow some diagrams to scale and some modelling pertaining to the great elephant in the room, which, if addressed, most of these issues being canvassed tonight would flow away, as our water should be able to from Pakowhai. We are unique in that regard on the Hiratonga floodplain. Everywhere else, it comes up to whatever it comes up to, with flow, gravity, lie of the land, but generally it's a metre or so, like Twyford this time, for example, and then it gets on its merry way to the sea. So all of this, as I say, if we just talked about the elephant in the room, many of these things we're discussing would flow away with our water if it only could be infrastructured to do so. I'm old enough to remember when they put the Clive, sorry, I don't know the new Maori name, but the river at Clive into the channel slightly to the west of Farndon Road. And it was sorely needed. It negated the flooding hazard, which I'd had many of. They had one more after, but that was a freak. As this has probably been the greatest freakish deluge in our catchments, it would have to be calculated, because I know that infrastructure regards telemetry and the power being on at your offices, it'll only ever be a best guess. I think it'd be safe to hazard a guess that it may be, since European time anyway, the heaviest inundation. What I just have never quite been convinced of is just a mere 3 kilometres from the sea, where the rivers come together, which served us beautifully for 60 years. I'm not being a smart-ass, wise after the event guy, but now, as I said in the paper some time ago, given that we seem to be in a pattern of having these 500mm or more deluges in about 24 hours, we had one at the coastal strip in 2011. I'm not sure of the inundation level amount in Napier, but they had that one very concentrated. We don't know how much was over the sea, but my brother at Miani and myself at Pakowhai, we had a third of Napier's rain. So those very focused short inundations seem to be becoming a pattern. Now, on one of the diagrams tomorrow, it will demonstrate how, with buying just 1 hectare of land at the back of cropping paddocks and only still utilising the 2 bridges, both properly working as bridges again, with substantial channels and no shingle on the seaward side of the northernmost one, as has been the case pretty much since the wetland was there. I'm no great mathematician, but I've never quite got a handle on how 2 channels of substance and bridges were meant to fit through one. The railway bridge, just up from the Tudaikuri Road Bridge, before the flood, I stood on the silt and I touched the girder that supports the sleepers. And then you compare that with the same mode of construction of the other bridges, the same tapered oval abutments, and then they go into their individual columns under that where they disappear into the water. And it's a no-brainer how much lost capacity under that. And then, as I say, to be useful, it would have to go underneath, have a channel out under the Yarrawarra, Tutaikuri Road Bridge that isn't impeded by that shingle bar. Yes, so my point is, it just seems a very simplistic, blunt instrument, Nick, I know it's what you had to confine yourself to, but we all aspire in Pakowhai to ideally having been a more transparent process. And the other thing I'd like to say is, in a sense, it consigns all the Category 3 land to a pastoral and one season long ground cropping wilderness. And I say wilderness relative to its lost potential. And by that I mean, the way they grow apples now, they spend $150,000 to $75,000 a hectare. And then a large corporate neighbour of mine has subsequently spent $40,000 a hectare, well, it's about $1.5 million, to get the silt to the point at which the council's generous undertaking to remove it kicks in. But there's so many, I just feel it's so visionless in that, okay, the rate to take will be down for all time until that. I think any reasonable person with a modicum of imagination, it might not happen in my lifetime, but it's just a case of how many horrible animal deaths, lost income, more insurance claims, if we can get any form of insurance, less money into the Hawke's Bay economy will it take? When does the tipping point come where it becomes a no-brainer to give us an outlet? Very fortuitously, Nigel, this time round, it's great that it's been so kind with government help to not impose a great burden on the Hastings District ratepayer. But if we have a further, deeper, longer-lasting inundation, is the solution then to march it up the beginning of Orangaroo Valley, over the Koropipo Flats and maybe Omahu, and surely there must come a point when we have a less third world answer and recognise all that lost potential from the fact that it would be way too risky. I'm sure most corporates would agree, kiwifruit's even dearer to establish, to make that expenditure in the knowledge that that could just happen to them all over again. That's about all I have to say. Thank you.
There was one here, there's one down the back that I promised. There's two actually. In fact, I might get them. I think, just conscious of the time, and we probably need to wrap things up shortly.
My thing sort of follows on from Brian's. It's fine to say we need to move forward. Now we're on a commercial, basically, property. So you're offering to buy out our residential area, so that because it's not safe for us to live there. But it's safe for people to go in and work there. When during the flooding, didn't we see all the RES workers on top of roofs being, rescued along with the locals? How you can't qualify one against the other. Tim and I have worked all our lives, and what have we got to sell? Nothing. We can't put a house there under 3. We live almost, and it says there, it's the safety of egress. Well, our house, you could possibly spit to the roundabout. If we couldn't get out, who could? As long as there's not people on the bridges sending you back into it, like there was the first time out. It's there for us.
Give us some notice. We're going to have it this time.
Yeah, so perhaps while I'm here, I'll take Troy's question, and Nigel, you can ponder that one.
This one's to Nick. Sorry, Nick. I opened the inbox this morning to my delight to see that there's Hawke's Bay Regional Council rates demand in the air. Which, metaphorically speaking, felt like a kick to the head on the way down to the footpath. Can you talk to that?
I totally disagree with you that would be the correct thing to receive with this here. Sorry, I didn't know that was about to happen. Automated system, but absolutely don't. I can understand why you would not feel pleased with that happening today.
So you're going to tell us not to pay it?
So take that on board.
Do you think we're going to pay it? We're not paying it.
There is a remissions policy that council has set up, and that remission is on application.
Make it automatic.
So just to the lady's point, so my understanding is that the feedback process on the categorisation is still open, so it's not final. So the opportunity is still there for you to contribute to that, and there's been some good suggestions tonight, and these guys are open to that. So while that window's open, grab it, and then on Friday, after the council meeting, the consultation process on the voluntary buyout will commence. And that closes on the 5th of September.
I'm so confused about category 3. Like, it means that it's not safe to live there, right? So how come it has been for the last 6 months? That makes no sense.
So the question is, if it's not safe to live in category 3, how come it has been for the last 6 months?
It's been from what council's done in that last 6 months that has made it unsafe, because that, or have you known that it's unsafe and not evacuated everyone?
No, we started with most of Pakowhai being in what was called 2A. So 2A basically said we need to do some more work to understand what the risk is to Pakowhai and can it be mitigated. And that's the work that's been underway.
But so now that it is a 3, just everyone have to evacuate because it's a risk.
3 essentially means that the risk to life is significant, and that's where
Is it starting when the government pays them out, or starting today?
It'll start when that final decision is taken. At the moment, we're going through the process of, if there's more information to be supplied, please supply it. At the end of that process, a final decision gets made, and then for people in 3, you know, I get the word voluntary is a bit of a challenge in that situation, but that's where people can either choose to go through the buyout process, or some people may choose to stay where they are and not take up that
I just
offer.
don't understand, why isn't it safe?
It's that risk to life assessment that I've talked through.
But isn't it the same everywhere? Like even Taradale and that, it was just luck that it didn't happen there. So the next one that comes, you're saying it'll flood the same.
We wouldn't be standing here tonight if the flooding had occurred somewhere else. I'd be standing in that community, and there's a risk anywhere on a floodplain, and I absolutely accept that. Stock banks are not going to protect people forever and a day. The process we've got for here is one that's been set out because Pakowhai was flooded, and that's the assessment we have to make based on that situation.
The mitigating factors of various aspects of negligence. You haven't taken into account the negligence on the part of the forest people. You're basing it on what occurred, and then you're making assumptions that the same thing will occur in the future with now very different set of circumstances.
Fair point. So I've got a question here, one there, and then the gentleman at the back, and then we'll close it off.
Hey, can we just have Duncan asked earlier on, while the lady from the Insurance Council was here,
Yeah.
can we have an answer on if we choose to stay in category 3 and we don't accept the buyout, will we be covered for fire and theft on our insurance?
So Sarah, a question for you. If people choose not to accept the buyout and stay, will they still be able to be insured for fire and theft?
Highly unlikely.
Highly unlikely. Where was I? This man here?
you can't build enough banks. You go over to Holland, they live 75 or 80% below sea level, and their banks don't break. Now why don't you go over there and have a look? But no, you spend money on this guy, that guy, the other guy. You're gonna go look where they build banks.
I actually spent 5 months of my life living in Wageningen in the Netherlands, so I understand some of what they've done there. The job in front of us around Category 3 is something that's practical and feasible, and that's the assessment that's being made. Long term, as gentlemen here talked about before, there's going to be some long-term thinking about flood protection right across the country, and some major investment that is going to need to be made in how that happens, and how New Zealand looks in 20 or 30 years' time, given the impacts of climate change. The challenge I've got tonight is making those decisions in a way that's really quick and practical for this community.
So this is lockstep kind of situation throughout the islands, is it? Does it happen from north to south?
I think Nick can only deal with what he can deal with here. So, just the last question of the night from a gentleman who should remain quiet at the rear of the room.
Put it inside, people.
Nick, a couple of questions to you. And look, you know, it's been said before tonight, we acknowledge the fact that you've fronted up and answered us as honestly as you possibly can, and we appreciate that. But my two questions, and I call it the Lawrence York Plan, which was using Chester Hope as a potential flood zone. Have you costed that out and compared that with the $100 million that's been put up to move everybody out? Given that the Lawrence York Plan was in effect safeguarding all of Pakowhai. So that's the first question. And the second question, I presume you're going to release the report and all its appendices in a term that can be interrogated by people so that we can understand the methodology that went through.
Yes to number two. I'm sorry, look, I'm not familiar with the Lawrence Yule Chester Hope plan, but I understand it's been looked at, and the basis of it doesn't work, so it's not a flyer.
Nick, are they going to reinstate the, what's the stream called? The Waimeti flood bank?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
I thought I got that from the other night, thank you.
Okay, look, thanks very much everybody. I think we will call it there because these guys will be here if you've got another question, take them one-on-one, which would be great. And I think, thank you Jeff for your introduction. I commend people for maintaining a level of civility. It's a bloody tough situation. And someone's got to draw a line on a map somewhere, and as much information as possible is being taken into account, and that process has not finished.
What was the answer to that guy's question about who has to clean up the stuff that's going through? Like if you do the buyout thing, whatever, can you leave everything there, or do you get more money if you make it?
It's still it'll be part of the policy that'll be confirmed on the 14th of September. Okay, so. Yeah, that's so what are the channels for providing the feedback into the consultation process? So if we can just have a little clarity around that. So there's the consultation around the finalisation of categorisation, and then there'll be the consultation around the quote-unquote voluntary buyout.
The simplest way around the land categorisation is simply to work through the connectors. That's how it's worked up till now, and they feed all the information back to us. Don't worry that they might have a Hastings District Council badge on. we talk to them about 25 times a day. So use that mechanism. There is a mechanism for people who want their individual property reassessed to do that as well. And again, you can work that through the connectors.
Can we just have another show of hands who wants to stay and live on their land in Pakowhai? Just a show of hands in the room, please. You guys have got a problem. Yeah, we're drawing the line, not you. Change the category.
Pakowhai!
Yay!
That's your community, that's open, that's how you engage.
Slow down, people.
Yeah, hey, thanks, just on the buyout consultation, Friday, there'll be a pretty simple 3-page document. There's a range of ways, my voice, my choice, give us your feedback, you can call into the council, library.
We have to apply to remain.
No, this is the categorisation process Nick's talked about. This is the feedback on that we're going out to the community around the voluntary buyout. So it's important that people have their say.
So just before you leave, people, there was a registration opportunity when you came in. Part of the reason for having that is to make sure that the authorities have got your most up-to-date contact details. So if you want to update them, make sure they're up to date, and you haven't already registered, please do. The connectors are here, Sarah from the Insurance Council is here, and these guys are here. So thanks very much for your attendance. Appreciate it's a tough time.